All right, everyone. Welcome to the Belonging Project. And we're going to have several folks speaking today. Speaking right now is Ginny Bianco Mathis, and I will try to coordinate today's session. Welcome to all of you that have volunteered to be part of the Belonging Project as coaches. I know on the line we have some very seasoned, all of them. We have a group of very seasoned coaches, colleagues, and some of you are from Seyfarth because you have been part of the coaching project there for 5 years. And some of you are external to Seyfarth who have volunteered your time and have gotten your certifications through, I am sure, a variety of approved ICF sessions. And I am going to turn it over to Corey a second and have her just give an overview of the Belonging Project and where we are. And then we're going to move to Bill, who is going to have a few words, and then I will take over. Just a reminder, you should be seeing the slides, and I believe you in the email that you received, there was a request that you make a copy or have two different screens so that you can refer to the materials as we go along. All right, Corey.
So like Ginny said, welcome to the Belonging Project. The Belonging Project was born out of the current circumstances that we find ourselves. As we all know, the legal profession is struggling with inclusion and diversity, but we know that in times of crisis, things could get even more difficult. Jeannie, are you speaking?
No.
Okay, it said you were speaking. And so this project was designed very specifically. We considered the fact that during a time like this, economic crisis, a pandemic, that the issues that diverse law students and attorneys face will be exacerbated, whether they're systemic barriers or the kind of things that we saw happen in 2008. And so we created this project very specifically to support diverse law students and lawyers who may be impacted by the pandemic. Of course, in the last 3 weeks, we've had a second pandemic that has rolled out, and that has to do around race. This project is going to bring a variety of people to us for assistance. It could be law students who are looking for a job. It could be law students who had summer associate programs lined up and those programs have disappeared. And one of the things about summer associate programs is they provide opportunities for law students to get key skill development that helps them be lawyers. You may have practicing lawyers who their law firms offered CLE and other development, and those development opportunities may no longer be there. We may have people who are unemployed. We may have people who are furloughed. And we may have people who are employed but need to supplement their personal, professional, mental health, and other development through the Belonging Project. And so we're going to have a wide variety of people who will be coming to us. And so we thank you very much for agreeing to do this. The coaching program is just one out of the 4 anchors of the Belonging Project, but it is one of the ones that we are most excited about because we know that coaching is powerful. It's a powerful tool and an important tool in helping us move forward. So thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ginny.
Okay, hold on. All righty. And this is a quick handoff because now I'm passing it on to Bill.
And can you unmute me? I seem to be muted. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it says mute on the thing.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Bill Shergan, and I guess for lack of a better word, I'm the champion of Seyfarth's attorney coaching program. And as Judy mentioned, approximately 10 years ago, Seyfarth introduced a coaching program and a coaching culture for our attorneys using trained partners as our coaches. Many of the coaches that are at the training here today are have been part of the Seyfarth program, plus a number of other external coaches. But we want to thank all of you for volunteering your time and expertise to this important project, as Corey mentioned. Most of the principles that are going to be reviewed today are going to be things that you're already familiar with, but they are going to be tailored to the specific group of coaches that we're focusing on and the goals of this program. And so what I want to do now is turn it over to Ginny and to Lisa to go through and actually do the substantive part of the program. And once again, to thank all of you for agreeing to participate in this important program.
Thank you, Bill. All right. What I'm going to cover is not going to be new. It is a refresher for the Seyfarth coaches, a refresher for you all that are out there coaching in the world and doing your thing and adding value. And we are refreshing ourselves with the frame of remembering this particular population, depending on the kind of coachee that you may get, all right, given some of the things that Corey has already shared. So I'm going to go over a basic coach model and the kind of dialogue that we all live and breathe when we coach. We're going to look at some steps and resources, and then we're going to look at some scenarios and tips given this particular population. Okay. So now first, the basic process. You are being prepared right now. That's number two. Number one, the coachees were prepared and or will be prepared as they sign on. We did an initial 20-minute session for them where we talked a little bit about what coaching is, what it isn't, how it is not mentoring, how they need to be ready to be questioned and to be part of a process to lead to some goals that they feel would be important for them to move towards at this particular time. So they need to watch that before they would be meeting with you. Okay. Now they will then sign on, and Corey and team will match these folks up with one of you. And they'll look at a little bit of the background of the person who is signing on, because they do have to answer some questions, and otherwise it will be random. Okay. That's number three, is the questions they'll be answering. Then there's going to be a pre-survey that both you as a coach and the coachee will be asked to fill out, sort of a pre-thoughts about coaching. So then we can do some measurement afterwards with a post-survey. And of course, we'll share that with all of you. As you have been told, as part of this whole program, you're going to be offering 3 formal coaching sessions, 45 minutes, over 3 months. Now, the timing of that is not locked in. If a particular person wants all 3 in 1 month, and you can accommodate that, just like you do with any of your coachees, make that work for both you and the coachee. However, it is 3. If it happens then that the coachee says, well, I want more coaching, then have them go back to Corey, and you can let Corey know whether you are willing to give more coaching, under what circumstances you're willing to give more coaching, etc. Okay. Then you start, and it will end with the post-survey. So that's just an outline of the logistics part. So now let's get a review of the process. You all have different processes, I'm sure, given the particular education that you got in your coaching. These are the steps that we use at Seyfarth, and I am sure yours coincide All of us have probably seen that chart that compares all the different processes, and they all basically look the same. They just have different titles. So we can't go too far afield in looking at these. Establish the coaching relationship. Those are those initial discussions that you have with your coachee. Then we're going to ask that you do some kind of action plan with your coachee, 1 or 2 things that they want to work on, and some of the steps that they can take. We find this exceptionally important when dealing with folks in the legal profession. And I think it will be especially important in this, dealing with this particular population. And I'll show you what we mean by that. Then you'll go through your 3 sessions, and towards the end, you want to talk about how have you moved towards your goals. Obviously, in 3 sessions, you probably have not finalized those. You need to keep on going by using some of the techniques that we have been working with, and then helping that coachee come up with how they're going to coach themselves, get a coaching partner, or maybe seek more coaching. Most importantly, how might they hardwire some of the tools that you might have been sharing with them to keep this coaching appointment with themselves as they continue on their journey. Of course, during all of these steps, we use the best dialogue, advocacy, and inquiry that we all have been trained in. So now if you follow along in the materials, you'll note that each slide coincides with a job aid for each step. And obviously, I'm not going to go through each step in detail. However, this is to show you where you can have more resources if you need them. So we first have to remember that through all the steps, we have to use our best advocacy and inquiry, listen globally, making connections between what they say, what their facial expressions are, ask those powerful questions to help them think through themselves what it is, what they're feeling, what that picture looks like in terms of accomplishing what they would like to accomplish. Support them through advocacy, not telling, always using action kinds of ways to get them back into the conversation, such as how might you go about involving more people as you create a broader network? How might you go about gathering materials that might help you feel better, etc. Then there's some advanced dialogue techniques. There's a full job aid in here on how to take things to a higher level. And there a reminder to use some kind of flow model. Ours is the COACH, which I'll cover in a minute, okay? So now going into step 1, which is when you are establishing that relationship. You're talking to this person for the first time, and you want to review a few key points that they would have heard in the pre-session that they were required to take. So it should not be the first time they're hearing it. Here's what coaching is. This is not mentoring. This is not training. This is not therapy. This is a way for us, for me to support you in trying to define and pinpoint some creative vision of some things that you would like to add to your repertoire, add to your skill sets to move towards the best you can be. You're the coachee, I'm the coach. We're working under this umbrella of the Belonging Project. This is a time for us to create a space where you can talk freely. I'll jump ahead a little bit and talk about confidentiality. Things that you share with me are not shared with anybody. unless you and I decide that's something you may want to do. But otherwise, it is totally confidential. And we are using certain kinds of tools where you will be looking at perceptions versus reality, ego, fear, impatience, the kinds of things that sometimes get in our way to accomplishing what we say we really want to accomplish. You'll explain to them that there are the 4 steps. We're now in the first step, and we're going to have these 3 sessions, and then we're going to have a discussion about how you can carry on yourself. And we are going to come up with an action plan. And this action plan could be just a list. It could be something you keep in a journal. It could be something like this, and then you can show them an actual format, which we will be providing to you all. And I'm showing you a sample in a few seconds. Step 2, which is on page, 5 in the materials? I have to put my glasses on for this, everyone.
7.
Build and finalize an action plan. I have that on page 5 in the materials. Okay. Anyway, here's where you would refer to the action plan and, hey, why keep notes? The reason we'd like you to keep notes is we are going to, and you're going to come up with things that you're going to do between the sessions. And it has been found that if you write things down, writing things down forces reflection. And it's through reflection that learning takes place. So that is why we are hitting that point hard. We're going to create a couple of goals that you feel you do want to achieve out of this, because that will be our roadmap. And as a lot of these folks have probably heard already, we want them to be SMART goals in terms of measurable, in terms of painting a picture of what it will look like. So when we're done, you can see what you have achieved. A lot of times, what we believe may be a little off kilter, and we may, through this coaching, be encouraged to look at things with another set of glasses, so that you see that whether it is true or false in your mind, if it's a perception, you still might want to do something about it. And so either way, some actions will need to be put into effect. It is not the way of coaching to sit there for hours to talk what is right and what is wrong. Right or wrong, if that is the status of things, something might need to be done. It's your decision. You may find yourself boxing. As we all know, we often have to do. The coachee starts talking, and right, all this stuff is coming out. And you, hold on, let me summarize. You shared a lot with me. Let me box those into some categories that I'm hearing. I'm hearing that you're having some frustration, getting depressed certain times during the day, getting stuck. I hear that you feel that your present network isn't adequate enough for this next level that you need to go to. I see that you, and you also talked about maybe doing something temporarily until your job comes through because it's been put on hold. So those are 3 different things that we might need to talk about. So that's what we mean by boxing. Of course, in an action plan, you have the coachee think through what some of the challenges are, explore what resources they have. And as we all know, as coaches, folks have more resources than they acknowledge, and helping them discover that is a powerful gift that we bring to coaching. And then discussing the best tracking method. That is why we're recommending the action plan or list, since it's a good tracking. What did we discuss last time? What did we be discussing this time, etc. All righty, conducting ongoing coaching. And that's step 3 on the next page in the materials. You're tracking progress. And as you all know, it also helps so that you can do some acknowledgement. Oh, well, I only did this one thing. Well, that's much further along than you were when we started talking. And that is how you will incrementally meet the goals. Incorporate real-time data as the person is talking to you and you're dealing with them. You will notice things that you might want to point out as something that they may want to work on. You might say something like, I'd like to share something with you. I have noticed that whenever I ask you a question, you tend to answer in a tentative way. You're not too sure, and then you trail off in giving your answer. I'm wondering if that's something you do with others. We sometimes forget to take that marvelous in-time information that's being given to us. Really encourage the coachees, especially these coachees, to include others in their process. Reach out to the resources if they're at a university, reach out to the resources if they're in a law firm. Reach out to other people that are going through what they're going through. Reach out to role models and role play with them, how to make those connections, make it comfortable for them so that they create the support system that they may or may not be moving towards. The rest, I think, are pretty self-explanatory with the self-reflection. And then the last one, and the last step, is to help them really celebrate the movement they have made, the challenges that they may still be working against. In between coaching, we help them with homework assignments, or we call them field practice. Go out and talk to these people, go out and conduct this research, go get further feedback in this way or that way. And how are you going to take that and hardwire it into the kinds of things that you're going to continue to do? Transfer those habits. And I'm sure you all have some wonderful things that you might be able to advocate for them. And again, we want to establish ground rules. That's in the beginning. A reminder here, total confidentiality, as I already expressed. We will be using an action plan. That's important, that there's open honesty, openness, and mutual respect. The 3 meetings, 24-hour notice for changing a meeting. You come up with the agreement with your coachee. We put that in as a standard. We also feel that if there is a no-show, you might want to do 1 reach out, but then that's it, right? This is only 3 sessions. And a 1 reach out would be something you may want to do. But of course, I talk about that, as I'm sure you all do in your own practice, right up front. All right. Any questions about that half? If you would put those in the chat, we can get to those, make sure we get to those at the end. I am now going to turn it over to my partner, Lisa, and she is going to do and have us look at more of the dialogue and talking techniques that probably would be most helpful with this particular group. And if you follow along,
it's pages 19 through 22, Ginny, in the packet.
yeah. One more thing before I leave you, everyone. On page 18 in the packet, there is a sample action plan format. And it just has the goal, some actions, steps I'm going to take before the next session, and then, some summary. Any kind of format that you find will be helpful. All right. Thank you, Lisa.
You're
In the
welcome.
packet, when Lisa starts, you'll note that this is a master job aid where the points and bullets on the slide are in the left column. The right column gives you multiple examples of how to say it, word it. Okay? All righty, Lisa.
Thank you. Greetings to everybody. Happy Friday. This is exciting to spend this time with you. I'm glad we have 1 hour left. So my section of today's interaction is going to really focus on language. And I'm wondering, Mike, if you're still here, is it possible for us to ask everybody to enter their favorite go-to question in chat so we could just see, what people typically, oh, I'm going to ask this, and that's kind of my thing. If that's possible, that would be great. I'm going to.
Yeah, anybody can put in anything in the chat feature.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. I tell this story about myself because I have a very close, warm feeling about Seyfarth, and so all of you, by extension, are included in that. People will react to your language, and they will come to know you through your language. And so I tell this story about an interaction with a client one time. He was telling me what he had done. And I listened, and at the end of the conversation, we were on the phone, I said, that's one approach. And he started to laugh. And I asked him why he was laughing. And he said, I know when you say to me, that's one approach. What you really mean is I should have thought of a few more ideas and gone with something else. And I think that that's telling when you're having conversations with folks. To one of the jobs I would suggest of an effective coach is to provoke thinking, and provoke thinking that goes beyond what's just right in front of somebody. And part of that goes to the first bullet point on this slide, which actually should read creating emotional connection and empathy. Ginny mentioned the concept of a safe space. And we have had much feedback over the years, you probably have too, that people feel very safe and connected with their coaches. And so if you approach these conversations from a perspective of how can I help, that creates a very powerful conversation with the folks and provides tremendous value. As you see, you're helping coachees obviously to face different challenges. They're going to come up with and complete some form of an action plan. Ginny talked through that a bit. The format of the plan itself is not a do or die. They have to do what's on page 18 or else it's never going to work. That's not the point. The point is, as Ginny referenced, that in research, when people actually write down goals and track progress, their chances of success are increased exponentially. And this gives you documentation that you can use every time you're having a meeting, a call, any kind of interaction. And the coachee, him or herself, can use it as well to track their own progress. It frees you a bit to listen very attentively to what the coachee is saying, because sometimes you're going to want to take a step back and then connect the dots, things that they have been saying to you, for example, over the last 15 minutes, so that you can help them extract meaning that they didn't realize was there. In your packet on page 19, this is where these tips start, and you see them going through here. I would like to make a point on number 2, helping the coachee discover different ways, not the right or wrong of what has gotten them to where they are right now. The point, I think it's very useful to take out of this, if you don't do it already, is to encourage people toward curiosity, not judgment or blame, because that is a surefire way to get stuck. So it's a thought. Okay. May we have the next slide, Mike?
Ginny's controlling the slides.
Jenny. Jen, can you flip it to the next one? Because evident, or maybe I can, I don't know. Nope. Yes, thank you. Okay. Guiding the coachee, supporting them, helping them take action, small steps, as Ginny referenced earlier. You know, a small step, even if they come back to you and say, I went and spoke to so-and-so and it didn't go well. And this is something that they've been wanting to do. They wanted to have a conversation, didn't know how, you helped them script it. They went, they come back, and that's what they say to you. You say, okay, well, describe to me what didn't go well. They tell you. Neutral observer, it didn't go well. But they took the step to have the conversation, and previously they never would have done that. That is something to be celebrated. Now you can go back and fine-tune the approach so they can at least give themselves credit for doing something that they had never done before. And that is a very powerful thing. Okay. Next slide, Ginny. The action plan of whatever sort does also establish accountability. And, you know, this is something that is important. You know, you can be the best coach on the planet, and if the coachee does not do the work, you know, they are not going to be able to magically take advantage of your fabulousness. They need to put the work in to achieve their own successes, and you can be the champion and the cheerleader and the person who also kicks them in a part of the anatomy that maybe I'm not supposed to say on webinars much. But the point is, you are that person who helps with the accountability and the energy around taking action that is extremely fulfilling for folks. Of course, asking your questions. Mike, I saw a couple of questions only, somebody asking why I was asking that, and none other. Did we get a bunch? Because if so, I don't see them.
You should be able to scroll down. There are a couple of them did come in.
Lisa, would you like me to share some of those?
Yes, if there are any, Ginny, that you want to throw out, that'd be fabulous. Thank you.
Okay,
I don't
we
think
got
so,
some, why is that important to you?
Mhm.
For the sake of what? Right, so, you know, again, why? Is there another way to think about that? What evidence supports that story? Is that something you need or want? You know, is it a need or a want?
Mhm.
What would your best future self want you to do in this situation?
Mhm.
What would be most helpful to you? What strength are you bringing to this situation? What is the story you're telling yourself? How do you think others perceive that? What might it look like to then do whatever?
Mhm.
What's important to you? How does that help you further your goals? Tell me more. Wow, what a fabulous list.
That's a great list. There are a couple in the middle about what would your future self, say or want. A variation on that I have heard before is if you ask the question, what do you want to have happen, they tell you, and then following up with what will be different if you do that? What's the outcome that you would want? I don't know if anybody has had this experience, maybe once or twice, but sometimes people are reluctant to take action. There is something to be said for, the devil I know. And despite your best work in session 1, Coachee says they're going to do XYZ, they come back and they didn't do it. And as you're asking them questions about it, they give you a lot of reasons about that won't work here. I just didn't, I didn't think I could, say that. I changed my mind, whatever. And so you see on the 4th bullet of this slide, one of my favorite questions, which is, when you get that from somebody, it's, you feel, at least I do sometimes, that I'm hitting my head against a wall. And when that happens, I stop because it hurts. And so I would prefer to ask the person, I hear you giving me a lot of reasons that seem very important to you. And I've heard you say, that the story you're telling yourself is that just won't work here. And I appreciate your perspective. And so I just want to ask, before we move on to something else, what are the consequences of doing nothing? A version of that would be, what are the consequences of taking no action? Because sometimes when a person is in the middle of a tough situation, it is not difficult for them to feel like they can't do anything. And it is almost always possible that someone can do something. And so by phrasing the question that way, you may find that you can push the person out of that stuck place and get to help them get to action. Ginny mentioned earlier the action plan providing a roadmap and a structure for moving forward. And then you can see how perhaps the person, the coachee, might transfer elements of action planning to other parts of his or her work. As an example, I was talking to a coachee today whose bosses see him as an incredibly bright, very potential, fabulous resource, a lot of connections, think tank kind of person in DC. And the issue they have is that he appears unprepared, disorganized. And so he was working on collecting his thoughts in advance, having notes that he created. I was aware that he was doing this. But when I checked with his boss, we were getting feedback that the key partner still did not experience him in this way. And so I asked him to send me his notes so I could see what he was preparing. And when I saw the notes, they were a Word document. I'm not going to say they were rambling, but I had to work to extract what was the key point, what was the action I took and when, what was the result, and what are the next steps. This partner guy is all about action. And so I sent him a copy of just that kind of 4-column template. I said, I'd like to discuss this with you in our session today. We did. And I asked him for his reaction, and he agreed that seeing it that way did punch up what was being done. And he has now committed to doing this for the next month for all of his calls. And also sending that just small template to the partner and some other key folks with a short note. I have heard your feedback in regard to organization and direct talk on action items. I'm intending to use the attached and would appreciate any feedback you care to share with me over the next month. Boom. Now, he showed them that he heard what they said. He's using a new tool, easy to use. He's actually doing what he thought he was doing anyway, but in a very clear, visible way. And he's making it easy for the folks to see him in a new way. If there are any neuroscience fans on the call, there is a concept called reticular formation, which you may or may not be familiar with. In brief, it addresses the issue that as human beings, we're kind of lazy. We hold on to old stereotypes or whatever we have in the box of someone, and we don't necessarily want to put a lot of work in to, processing all kinds of information to see them in a different way. So for example, if I asked you right this minute to take 5 seconds and look around your surroundings and count every blue object that you see right around you for this next 5 seconds, blue objects, go. Okay, so I'm curious, how many blue objects did we see? And Ginny, you may see in the chat what people say. Maybe you could just share with me because I don't have the chat box here. 3, 5.
3, 5, 7, 9, 10.
Wow.
6.
Okay. So now my question to you would be, how many yellow objects did you see? You're a smart group. Come on. Krista saw 10. No, Tasneem said 0, except for a large yellow rug. Okay, Carolyn, 0. My point, folks, thanks everybody. Thanks, Linda. My point about this is I didn't ask you to look for yellow. And when somebody's trying to change behavior, it really helps the audience, if you will, the team, the coworkers, to start changing their mind about somebody if the coachee can help them see them in a new way. So I encourage you to do that. Corey has some points now, I believe, if I am correct, on the next slide.
So thank you, Lisa. That was very good. At that last point where you asked us to look for yellow before you even said, I was like, ooh, she's talking the DNI language. I love it. So I'm going to talk about some things that may come up with this particular group. Ginny and Lisa have really covered the technical aspects of coaching. And I want to talk more about things that we see and address when we're working on inclusion and diversity, when we're helping leaders to lead differently, when we're helping diverse talent succeed in navigating organizations, and when we are looking at the various systems and processes in our organizations that maybe have blind spots in how we evaluate people and how we decide who has potential, in how we decide on things like confidence, assertiveness, and all of those things. And the reason we're talking about cultural fluency is very simple. Culture is the single most powerful lens through which we view the world and assess information. As lawyers, many of us here are lawyers, some of us are not, but even if you're not a lawyer, you're accustomed to working with lawyers because we invited, coaches who work with lawyers. We pride ourselves in our analytical skills, and we love to think about how objective we are. And we like to think of ourselves as objective beings who sometimes have emotions, when in fact, we are emotional beings who have the ability to be objective within a scheme. And what happens when it comes to culture are those rules, the traditions, the values that we absorb based on our environment. Culture could tie around gender, it could tie around national origin, it can be geographic, but we see these cultural differences show up in the workplace with diverse talent. And so I'm going to talk about some of those. And the reason we're talking about it is not so that you can solve the cultural competency or fluency issue. Like Ginny said, our roles as coaches isn't to debate whether something is right or wrong, or to solve any sort of bigger picture problem, but rather to help the people we're coaching come to a solution and an approach of action that will get them closer to where they need to go. And in order to do this, we need to understand the ways in which they may be communicating with us that are different, but also the way things that may be going on around may be impacting them differently than we may be perceiving it. So there are multiple dimensions on the cultural fluency spectrum that we could talk about. And today we're only going to talk about 4. Now, what I'm about to say, I want to be very clear, because when we talk about things like cultural fluency, we want to be clear that we're not giving you the idea that every single person from any particular group is going to behave in exactly the same way, right? These are general guidelines. They're not stereotypes, and they're not hard, bright red lines. So 4 dimensions that we will talk about: direct versus indirect communication. It's one of the things that I see very, very often. Now, what we're talking about here is there are some cultures where people are more direct in how they communicate. They say exactly what they mean. Their words are very literal to the message they're trying to communicate. Now, in many cultures where you have a lot of diversity, direct communication is more common because people feel like they need to be more explicit. And you will see it even in written communication. You will see cultures like that needing a lot more documentation of things. And then you have cultures that are more indirect, where people have, for lack of a better word, I would use the word softer way of saying things. They may use more words. There are expectations that there are norms and values that everyone knows, and so you should be able to read between those lines. Now, why is this important? It's important in the workplace because you can be having a conversation with someone and you're not even having the same conversation. Or you and your coachee have had a conversation and they've told you what they're going to do next. And they come back and you follow up on the homework and they think they've done what you both agreed they were going to do, but your understanding of what they were going to do is different than theirs. Similarly, we can sometimes not appreciate the dynamic of what people are going through if we're coming into the conversation from a different part of the spectrum, right? So this is not a workplace example, but it's a real example. My husband and I, my husband's from Iowa, indirect communication style. I grew up in Nigeria. We're very direct. Our conversations are very different. And we had certain situations that sometimes happen with in-laws. And things got to a point where I said, you talk to your mom, or I will, and you can decide which version you like better. And of course, he picked his version. But the ironic thing was, when he told me he had handled something, I never heard he had handled it, because he told me I did A, B, C. To me, that was not handling it, right? Because in a direct communication situation, I would have said, Ginny, this is what happened. This is how it wasn't appropriate. This is how it impacted me, and it cannot happen again. In an indirect communication situation, people may interact differently. So let's say it's a work situation. You're hearing what someone's doing. You may have a very different impression of what the issue is versus what their perception of the issue is. Similarly, when we're talking about the world of solutions, there are times that, more so as mentors than as coaches, we're really letting them come to the solution. Sometimes we throw out ideas, but there are times that we throw out things for people to do that are going to be even more difficult for them to do because of where they are on the spectrum. So direct and indirect. In the United States, we're going to see that dimension around East Coast, Midwest. That's a common one you hear. And when you're interacting with people who are more direct and you are indirect, they can be perceived as abrasive and rude, when in fact, their perception of people who are indirect is that you're evasive and sneaky. But being able to say, is there something cultural going on here that I may not understand? Or even digging deeper in terms of asking questions to understand. Where if somebody has done the homework you agreed on, and your perception is you didn't do what you said you were going to do, to be able to ask questions to help understand. So sort of like I did with my husband. What do you mean you've taken care of this? And then he's telling me what he did. And I'm realizing, oh my goodness, wait a minute. From his perspective, it's been dealt with. From my perspective, I'm remembering how my father dealt with similar situations and how I would deal with it. And I am superimposing that. Low hierarchy versus high hierarchy. This is another one that we see quite a bit. And here, culture intersects with gender in lots of ways. In high hierarchy cultures, people are going to be deferential to authority, and they're going to be deferential to people older than them. Similarly, or conversely, in a low hierarchy culture, the emphasis on equality is there. The emphasis that we all are equal is there. And so the way this shows up in the workplace, you have team meetings, you have people on your teams. Those who grew up in low hierarchy cultures are going to be more willing to be assertive, are going to be more willing to start speaking in the meeting without even waiting to raise their hands. Whereas people who are more low hierarchy are going to be more deferential. Now, it doesn't mean that they're less confident. It doesn't mean that they're less able, and it doesn't mean that they lack initiative. But those behaviors, depending on the cultural normative lens that the behaviors are being viewed through, can impact how people are being perceived or how effective or ineffective the individual solutions they come up with will work in their environment. And so what we have to recognize in those kind of situations is that these differences are going to show up in all kinds of ways. It's going to show up in the interactions people are having with their environment that they're bringing to you to solve. It's going to influence how we interact with them. So one thing that I can say about myself, there's a limit to how much debate that I'm going to engage in with someone who's significantly older than me. So even though I may know that you are my coach, and in order for me to get the best out of this, I have to be willing to be completely forthright. I may be hesitant to share certain things because I may perceive you as somebody more powerful than me, or in my cultural situation, definitely age. Age kicks in. Once I get to a point where somebody's close to my father's age, I may think things that I may not say simply because I don't want to come off as disrespectful. And so you have to be tuned in to where those things may be happening so that you can weed them out, or help people still continue to communicate with you, and setting the intention very much of your relationship so that they understand that being able to say to you they disagree or they're not sure about something is okay. And in fact, it's necessary so that you can effectively help them come to a solution that's workable. Collective versus individualistic. This one we see quite a bit as well. Some cultures are more collective, where the idea is we make decisions based on what's best for the group. We make decisions what's best for a community. Your identity is rooted in the community. So when I was coming to the United States, one of the things that my cousin said to me, I used to love music videos and singing and dancing, and the immigrants they don't send their children to the United States to come be dancers and singers. They send us here to be doctors and engineers and maybe a lawyer if you don't want to do any of those other things, but that's pretty down on the list. I joke, but I'm serious. And a cousin just said to me, whatever you do when you get to America, make sure you don't embarrass the family. And an aunt said the same thing. Whatever you do, don't embarrass the family. And so in collectivist cultures, there are not that many conversations about your desire, your dreams, picking a career based on what you want to explore, what you're passionate about. It's about what's good for the group. How can I provide? How can I help lift up? And so some of the people that you'll be working with will come from cultures like that, where even when they're making individual decisions, they may be factoring other things. So if you look at the data, for example, on the impact of diversity and inclusion in the profession, there's a lot of data that shows a lot of women leave the profession. And by the time they're in their 50s or so, we're seeing a huge dropout. What the data will show when you disaggregate it is that Black women are not leaving the profession. They may be leaving law firms, but they're more likely to be breadwinners and more likely to be supporting larger numbers of people. So when they leave, they're not leaving to stay home or do something else. They may leave and go to the prosecutors. They may leave and go in-house. So my point in giving that example is to reiterate that when people are coming to us to be coached, you're going to have people who are carrying different considerations at different levels. Another thing that we can think about is, for example, this pandemic and how it's having a disparate impact on people. We are working with some people who haven't known anyone who's been personally impacted, but in the city of Chicago, where, you know, a few months ago, we were saying 70% of those impacted were Black and brown. I know that I have colleagues who have lost people in their families. And so people are coming to this with different places on the continuum. We also see individualistic and collective differences show up with gender. Women in the workplace tend to be more collaborative. They tend to be more we focused than I focused. And sometimes those are things we end up coaching them on, where there's a perception you're not as assertive. There's a perception you don't have a leadership persona. And we're trying to coach them on how they can effectively talk about their accomplishments, how they can effectively show supervisors what they're doing and what they're achieving. And so we're advising them to use language that the environment understands and accepts as leadership, when in fact it's language that's suited for people who are more individualistic than collective. And so we have to help them as individuals get past the discomfort, but also come up with a solution that not only helps them get to where they're going, but helps them do it in a way that's authentic and effective. The last cultural dimension is expressive versus non-expressive. And this is self-explanatory. So cultures like mine, we're very expressive. We talk with our hands, we gesture, we dance, we do all kinds of things just to make one single point. And rather than just simply saying, oh my God, Ginny, you won't believe what I heard. It's a whole skit. Ginny, you won't believe. Can you believe? Ask me what I heard. You know, and it's this, we're just more expressive people. We're more likely for physical touch. On the other continuum, there are people who are less expressive, and we see this sometimes with certain Latin American cultures, but definitely with some Asian American cultures. And people can be perceived differently based on that, on their level of excitement, their level of commitment, their level of initiative, when in fact there are variations. We know that people carry extra burdens in the workplace, for example, when they're introverts and they feel like they have to come to work and play an extrovert. And it's very interesting that in legal, the studies indicate that probably over 70% of us are introverts, but yet still the characteristics that are lauded as confident and leadership skills in law firms in particular, generally tend to be extroverted behaviors. So we have a lot of people coming to work playing the role of an extrovert and going back home completely exhausted. So those are some of the dimensions of cultural fluency. Implicit bias, we all know what that is. It's the idea that there are decisions that we are making that are driven by our unconscious. Bias is simply a predisposition for or against. It can be positive, it can be negative. I can have a bias in that I love meat. I'm a carnivore. My husband and I joke, if my doctor tells me I have to go vegan, I'll probably just die because I don't know if I could give up meat. I have a bias for meat. Or you can have a bias against something. You know, there are things that I don't like. I hate watermelon. You can't get me to eat it. And even if something touches watermelon, I won't eat it. Okay, that's a bias against. And so there are a lot of decisions that we're making during the day. Some scientists put it at 35,000, some put it as high as 70,000. And about 90% of those decisions are being made unconsciously. And in an atmosphere where people are talking more openly about their experiences with race and all kinds of isms, you likely will have people who have been experiencing things at work that are related to bias or outright isms of some kind. Our role, like Ginny and Lisa pointed out, is not to solve that, but we can give space for it and acknowledge that that is their experience. One of the hardest things that, one of the things that we do that can be most problematic is when people show up with their unique experiences around isms or bias, and we respond in ways that may seem dismissive. So what could that be? It could be something like, well, we can't do anything about that, so let's talk about what we can do, as opposed to acknowledging that this is something that's real, and then having a conversation. Okay, what are the things that you can do that are within your power? So tone matters and approach matters. These are very real issues. And what we've seen in the last 3 weeks is the trauma and the stress and the anxiety that people feel around, for example, race, is all bubbling up. It's bubbling up. People are showing up to work saying that they're fatigued, they can't function, they can't focus. And that leads to the platinum rule. We generally engage people as a society with the idea that we should treat people the way we want to be treated. And the platinum rule is that we should treat people the way they want to be treated, which is why an awareness of cultural fluency and the biases that people may navigate are good to have handy. If we are unable to see through a lens that they bring, it's going to impact our ability to help them and to coach them. And so during this time that's a pandemic, you know, one of the things I've heard a lot of people say, and I agree with it, and I like to say it as well, we may all be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And so that's going to influence ideas that we may throw out. I've been with people when I was a young attorney trying to balance motherhood, and people gave suggestions that I walked away feeling not heard and dismissed. Because when some equity partner is saying to me, well, I have 2 nannies, I'm thinking, you don't pay me enough to have 1 nanny, much less 2. It can come off as very tone deaf. So being able to open up room and have space for people to share those different perspectives, and being aware that language like, well, everybody's suffering through this pandemic, so why don't you go ahead and let's focus on what you can control, can land very, very wrong. So that's an overview. And Ginny, I think we're waiting till the end for questions, right?
Yes.
Yes. So over to you or Lisa.
We're interchangeable. It's, you know. Okay, next slide, please, if we can. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. That was very fascinating. I don't know if you got that platinum rule idea from Brian Williams or not. That's where I first heard it. He's a very fabulous guy. He does a lot of speaking on service. He's from St. Thomas and grew up in the Marriott and Ritz cultures. And he has that on the platinum rule. It resonates with people all over. So just FYI. Okay, continuing about coaching and language, and to the point that Corey was just raising, when somebody gives you something, and this is on page 21 in the packet, item number 17, it's very helpful to and powerful to acknowledge what someone has said, acknowledge the emotion, acknowledge what's being expressed. And then if it is helpful, reframe it. And the example that's on page 21 in the packet, I think, is a good one to demonstrate this. You'll see here the language, and for those of you who are on the phone, I'll read it. I understand that the circumstances feel overwhelming. That's the acknowledging part. What one thing could you do tomorrow that would get you moving? That's a question and a bridge to reframe. So something to think about it. We have talked about this before. The idea of acknowledging and emphasizing the small steps. It's not a giant light switch or, giant step that we go from not having what we want to having what we want. There's work involved, and, each step builds on the other. So as a coach, best case, you are supporting the coachee as he or she works to change, puts new things in place, tries new things, extracts learning from what they're doing, and then folds that into continuous action. That is what's going on. Next slide, please. As you see, we are, all of us, starting with where the coachee is and hoping to keep expectations realistic. Sometimes you'll see in your material, there are several places where we offer the suggestion of using a scale of 1 to 10. So the coachee says, I want to be seen as a more assertive person when I'm working on matters. And you say, okay, well, if you had to rate the way you think people see you right now, assertive on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give yourself? I think I'm a 2. Okay, why do you think that? You get the information. Yep, that tracks. You say, so if we work on this over a couple of months, where would you like that rating to be based on what you're telling me? I want to be a 10. Okay, so now you want to do some reality testing about what would being a 10 look like? What would be different? Do you know folks who are a 10? What kinds of behaviors do you see from them? How likely is it that you might do X, Y, or Z? So using that rating scale, it's the client's rating scale. I mean, they're giving you their best thought, can help people to be realistic and to set themselves up for success. It's something you can do. Certainly other resources, and I know everybody, we could probably have spent the entire 90 minutes talking about resources, but there are 3 resources that I would just suggest to you could be incredibly valuable as you work to come from this place of how can I help. The Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute is a very fabulous book. It's part of 3, the most recent one they've written, and it absolutely embodies that concept. There are 2 books by a woman from MIT called Alone Together and Reclaiming Conversation. They focus on technology and how, as the name implies, technology has taken away a lot of our ability to connect with each other. And finally, London and Nelson wrote a book called Ubuntu. For those of you who are not familiar with the concept, I strongly recommend the book. Not because I think it's a fabulous book, I would give it probably a C or maybe a B-, but I think it does do a good job of introducing this concept and this idea of shared humanity, and the idea that what happens to one person happens to all of us. There is a very fabulous discussion of the philosophy and the idea that it's important to see people. And when you see them, that enables them to, in fact, be there. And without sounding too much, I'm coming from California, although I know you have offices, Bill, in San Francisco. I'm happy about that. I really do suggest this. I think it's a very powerful concept and one that you might want to explore. Keeping active, networking, helping people to recognize strengths in and of themselves and how to build on that and leverage that is key. And I'll just leave you with the last thing. I I think, am I on my last slide? No, I have one more. So making sure that folks are taking care of themselves, seeing what they're doing, to do that. If it's a walk around, if it's a fountain in the background, if it's, some kind of affirmations or, different kinds of apps that help people meditate, whatever that might be, encouraging people to, utilize that, I think, is a very powerful idea. I know we wanted to save the last 15 minutes for questions, so I'm just going to wrap up this thought. There are 3 questions that you can use to help a coachee focus and to support them as they're trying to identify, what it is that they're going to work with and how they're going to get there. The first question is, what are you paying attention to? Sometimes, just asking that question helps the person say, oh, well, I guess I'm really caught up in this whole, partnership possibility, or, being assigned to the case, or, whatever that it may be. What are you paying attention to? Can surface things sometimes in a very direct way. What matters to you is the second question. And that may be things that are internal, like my values and my preferences, or it might be external things like I was left out of that meeting, or I was left off of the distribution list. I wasn't included in the opportunity that was given to other second years, whatever. And finally, what are you going to do about it? Because we are very focused on action, both doing and being. And best case, you can support your coachee in both. So it's 5:15 on my clock. I'm going to turn everything back over, I think, to Corey and or Ginny for questions and wrapping up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. I would like to encourage all of you to type in a question if you would like to ask any of us. Of course, if you're like me, the questions all come from after I, hang up. So you have here the email addresses for all of us, and we will get right on it in making sure you have it answered, get the resources you need, etc. So anything in particular at this point in time?
I'm looking to see if there are questions. I don't see any.
No.
I think you can also raise your hand and then we can unmute you to ask a question if you want to do that too. Yeah, I don't see.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question.
Oh, good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Jan.
Jan Dubin. So my question is, how will the matching process occur? And if we have some specialty areas within scope of our coaching work, how do you learn about those so that if there are any coachees with particular needs, we can be aligned with that?
Well, when we sent you the form to fill out, where people signed up to be a coach, we didn't ask that question. So I'm wondering if perhaps you can just email us.
Okay.
And give that information. So email me and Ginny, or Ginny and I, whichever is correct. Ginny and I, because I'm going to be working with Ginny and Bill to do the pairings, and then we'll have that there.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. Ginny, it looks like a question came up on the.
Yeah, yes, okay. I'm actually answering it.
Oh, good.
That in the questions that the coachee has to answer.
Yes.
Before being matched, we do ask them questions around that will help us assess their level of commitment of moving forward and taking action. So in other words, and then they self-select after they watch the little webinar, which makes it very clear. There will be action. You will be given field assignments. This is an endeavor where you're being guided towards taking action. So then, and the last thing is, are you ready to commit?
Mm-hmm.
So that is to the best we can. These are folks that are willing to take this on.
Just one thing also, this is Bill Shergan. Anybody who's on the program who has not watched the Coachee short video, that's also, I think, a valuable tool to get a sense for what the coachees are being told to expect.
And we'll have that video up. Any other questions?
I just want to make a statement. You're given a lot of information in the materials, and most of this is, we have given Seyfarth permission to use it and within their copyright kinds of stipulations. Lisa, most of all of this, though, is from our publications. We are putting it out there because we believe in sharing and people being able to use things. And if you do, just please make sure that you cite us for the material. Really would appreciate that. All right, then I think we wish everyone happy coaching. And we're looking forward to also the end of surveys to see what very interesting things come out of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been great. And Mike, who's on the line, is going to edit this and make it look beautiful. And it will also be on the website in a few days. So if you need to refer back to it, you'll be able to. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bill?
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.